Hey guys, tonight we slip into a world where hope is a rumor and comfort is a myth. A wooden door slams shut, iron boots echo down the alley. Someone is running. No, limping. A child clutches a linen doll that's missing an eye. It's evening in a cramped village, and the torches are already lit. Not for light, but to find someone. You smell smoke, but it's not from a hearth. There's shouting near the well. Someone's been accused. Again. If this helped you wind down, a like and a sub would mean a lot. Drop your local time and location in the comments too. How are you doing tonight? Now, take a breath, pull the blanket tighter. We're going back to medieval Europe, but not the fairy tale version, not the gleaming castle and golden goblet story. We're going into the cold bones of the truth. Because this world, it doesn't want you to survive, and it certainly doesn't care if you're comfortable. Let's start with the basics, staying alive. Just staying alive is already an act of rebellion. You're born in a one-room house. House is generous. It's mud walls, a thatched roof that leaks like a drunk, and chickens sleeping in the corner. You don't own a bed. You share a straw mat with siblings, lice, and the occasional rat brave enough to join the party. You're lucky if your parents name you anything that isn't just boy or girl at first. There's a decent chance you won't make it past infancy. So some parents don't bother naming their children for weeks or months. That's not neglect. That's defense. Outside your village? Wild land, not hiking trail wild, like bandits hiding behind trees wild. Wolves prowl the edges. Actual wolves. You're not at the top of the food chain out here. You're somewhere around slow deer with a limp. Inside the village, you're still not safe. Famine comes in cycles, and when crops fail, your options boil down to beg, steal, or eat your shoe. People did, by the way. Leather was technically food grade in the worst years. And if someone decides you've stolen something, you're done. Forget courts. A mob is faster and cheaper. All it takes is one accusation shouted a little too loudly in the market, and you're tied to a pole with a sack over your head before noon. Historians still argue whether medieval justice leaned more toward brutal efficiency or brutally random. Honestly, it's both. Now imagine you're a peasant. That word sounds quaint today, like something embroidered on a TikTok cottagecore apron. But in medieval Europe, it meant own nothing, owe everything. You're taxed on your land, your crops, your livestock, your soul, your beard if it's thick enough, and if you complain, suddenly you're ungrateful, maybe even heretical. And we'll get to what that means. Spoiler, it rhymes with fire. Work starts before the sun and ends when your fingers stop moving. You plow with wooden tools that splinter. You sow seeds while bent over in the mud, and there's a good chance you'll bury someone in that same field by winter. Maybe even yourself. And God forbid you're injured. No hospitals, no ibuprofen, no forgiveness. You keep working, even if you've got a dislocated shoulder or an infected leg. Because if you don't work, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, you die. It's that poetic. Your clothes? A single tunic? Maybe a second one for special days, meaning church or someone's funeral. You might have a belt made of rope. No shoes, unless you're very lucky or very high-ranking. Even then, they're often wooden and unforgiving. Like medieval Crocs, but worse. Let's talk recreation. Oh, wait, there isn't any. Unless you count standing in a field watching someone else's cow give birth as fun, or betting on whether a chicken can outrun a goose. People did, though, because any distraction was better than staring at your own mortality 24/7. You might think, well, at least the nobles had it better, right? Technically, they had stone walls, better food, and a higher chance of surviving a harsh winter. But even lords and ladies weren't immune to disease, betrayal, or accidentally being served poisoned wine during dinner negotiations. One wrong political move, and suddenly, your castle has become your tomb. Social status wasn't a shield, it was a target. And religion? Oh, it's everywhere, but not in a cozy Sunday service and cookies kind of way. It's more like, do exactly what we say or be damned for eternity. The church controls knowledge, land, laws, and fear. And if you question the priest, that's not curiosity. That's sin. Dangerous sin. You're taught from the moment you can walk that suffering is not only normal, it's noble. Pain is a gift. Hunger is holy. Dirt is divine. Joy, suspicious. If you're laughing too much, the priest might raise an eyebrow and recommend a fast. We romanticize this era sometimes. Fair maidens, gallant knights, torches on castle walls. But remember this, those torches weren't just for mood lighting. They were also used to burn witches, light mob trials, or lead search parties when someone vanished, which happened a lot. And then there's fear. Not the fear of taxes or Mondays, real fear. Fear of the unknown, of wolves howling too close, of your neighbor getting sick, of your wife being accused, of your child vanishing into the woods. You live inside fear like it's a second skin. Want one last lovely detail? The most common scent in the air isn't flowers. It's smoke, sweat, manure, and rot. Perfume exists, but only for the rich. You? You smell like survival. But here's the thing. You don't question any of this, because it's all you've ever known. There's no better life to dream of. No vacation, no retirement. You work, you bleed, you sleep next to firewood, and pray the roof doesn't cave in during a storm. And if you make it to 40, you're considered ancient. Life isn't just hard in medieval Europe. It's aggressive. It's loud and cold and filthy and short. Every breath you take is against the odds. Every sunrise is borrowed. Every scrape might end you. And this is just the beginning. You wake up coughing. Again. Not because you're sick, though you probably are, but because the thatch above your head has been collecting mold all winter. The fire went out hours ago. The ashes are cold, and so are your toes. You curl tighter, wrapped in a wool blanket that smells like sheep and wet soil. You've been breathing in the same unwashed air as your entire family all night, and the room is thick with sweat, wood smoke, and something uncomfortably close to mildew. Outside, it's not much better. Your village path is not paved. It's not even flat. It's a pulsing mud artery, slick in spring, frozen in winter, and steaming with manure in summer. You step outside barefoot and hope the ground is only damp. But chances are you'll step in something, human or animal, because sanitation is more of a vague suggestion than a system. In fact, most villages don't have toilets so much as poop corners. If you're lucky, there's a ditch. If you're really lucky, there's a hole covered with wood slats that haven't rotted through, and if you're unlucky, which is often, you slip. People fall in, and yes, sometimes they die. That's how bad it is. People dump their chamber pots straight into the street from second-story windows. So if you're wandering through the alley in a daze, half asleep from a night of bad dreams and bad porridge, and you hear someone shout, "Guardy Lou," from above, that's not a fun medieval greeting. That's your warning to duck before you're hit with a warm bucket of misery. Historians still argue whether medieval towns ever had effective public sanitation. Some cities did build rudimentary sewer systems like London or Paris, but even then they were often clogged with refuse or used as hiding spots for criminals. Progress. Now, meet your new neighbors, rats. Rats are not shy. They're not cute. They're not Pixar characters. They're bold little beasts that climb, chew, steal, and sometimes sleep beside you. Their fleas jump ship onto your skin in the middle of the night. You'll scratch, you'll bleed. You'll wonder why your armpits hurt days later. Spoiler, that's not a rash. That's the beginning of something much worse. But we'll save the Black Death for later. Let's not forget the flies. Always the flies, buzzing around your eyes, your bread, your wounds, and the wounds never heal cleanly, because dirt finds everything. Your fingernails are black half the year. Your teeth are mossy. You cough up things that wiggle. You don't ask questions. There aren't many answers anyway. Even your water is out to get you. The village well, that's a shared pit of mystery and microbial roulette. Clean water is rare. Most folks drink ale or cider, not because they're party animals, but because it's literally safer than the water. And if you can't afford fermented drink, you boil river water and hope the frog parts settle at the bottom. Your food isn't much better. Bread is your main dish. Always bread. Sometimes with onions, maybe a root vegetable. If you're flush with luck, you might scrape together some fish or a pigeon. But famine is never far. One bad harvest, and suddenly you're chewing tree bark. Yes, literal bark. People made flour from it. It doesn't digest well, but it fills the ache in your belly at least for a few hours. Want something sweet? Too bad. Sugar's imported and costs more than your life. Honey is rare and bees don't exactly make it easy. Fruit rots quickly unless dried. So when you do get an apple, you eat the seeds, core and all. You might be tempted to forage, maybe find a mushroom in the woods. But if you pick the wrong kind, and let's face it, you probably will, your last words will be a bubbling, frothing whisper into the grass, because there's no poison control, no handy mushroom guide. Just a 50-50 shot and a funeral that smells like spoiled oats. And then, there's bread again. Let's talk more about that bread, because even the bread isn't safe. Ever heard of ergot? It's a mold that grows on rye. It can cause hallucinations, seizures, and gangrene. It's like LSD's evil medieval cousin. And entire villages have suffered outbreaks. People danced uncontrollably in the streets, laughed until they collapsed, or clawed at their own skin, convinced it was crawling with fire ants. But you still eat it, because hunger is louder than caution. Now, let's visit the average kitchen. There's no chimney, so smoke pools around your face while you cook. Your eyes sting, your nose runs, and every meal smells like burned fat and wet wool. You hang meat in the rafters to dry, which mostly means it collects soot, mold, and the occasional spider. Protein. Milk goes bad fast, so you curdle it on purpose. Cheese is less a recipe and more a desperate act of preservation. You learn to love the smell of just barely edible. And don't even think about throwing leftovers away. Nothing is wasted. Bones are boiled down again and again until they dissolve into a gray soup. Old bread becomes stuffing. Sour ale is poured over stale oats. And moldy food? Just scrape it. Or don't. What's a little fuzz? Fun fact, people used to make medicine from dried human feces. Not kidding. Medieval pharmacology is just an elaborate dare disguised as a profession, which we'll explore soon, right after we're done gagging. The thing is, this wasn't unusual. This wasn't shocking. This was normal. No one gasps when a rat scurries across the table. No one blinks when someone's tooth falls out mid-sentence. And when someone drops dead in the square from dysentery, you just step around the puddle and keep walking. People didn't live long, but they lived hard. They worked, they suffered, and they clung to whatever scraps of comfort they could find. A warm drink, a dog that didn't bite, a dry corner of the barn. That was luxury. And remember all of this, the filth, the stink, the rats, the rot. This is before plague, famine, or war knock on the door. This is baseline. This is the neutral setting. Medieval life didn't just ask you to endure, it dared you to. With every breath, every step, every meal, every sunrise. And if you woke up tomorrow with no new boils and the same number of fingers as yesterday, well, that's a good day. Your stomach aches again. Not from hunger this time, though that's never too far behind, but from the bubbling stew of something you can't name and probably shouldn't try to. You've been feeling off for days. Your hands are clammy, your tongue's the color of week-old ashes, and there's a sharp little pain behind your eyes that makes the candlelight flicker even when it doesn't. You need help. You need a doctor. Except there are no doctors. Not like you're imagining. No crisp coats, no clean gloves, no clipboards or diagnostic charts. In medieval Europe, medicine is a wild cocktail of superstition, astrology, trial and error, and a very creative relationship with bodily fluids. Your healer might be a barber, or a monk, or a man with 12 teeth and one eye who calls himself Master of the Humors. Maybe even a midwife who talks to birds. Credentials? Piffed. Who needs those when you've got leeches? So here you are, sitting on a stool that creaks like it's alive, across from a man in a rough-spun robe who smells faintly of onions and candle wax. He pokes your tongue, squints at your ears, and, oh yes, sniffs your urine. That's real. Urine diagnosis was a thing. Practitioners had charts of all the ideal colors your pee should be. Pale gold, probably okay. Murky green, get your affairs in order. Historians still argue whether these urine charts were based on genuine observation or just a medieval version of Pinterest boards for alchemists. Either way, people took it very seriously. You tell him about the headaches, the shakes, the feeling that you're melting from the inside out. He nods gravely and leans close. You've got bad humors, he says. Great. That's the medieval diagnosis equivalent of vibes are off. He reaches for his tools. A small knife, a bowl, a cloth. You're getting bled. That's the go-to cure for most things, bloodletting. The idea was that your body had 4 humors: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm, and illness came from them being out of balance. So if you were feeling hot or wet or overly melancholic, clearly you had too much of something. And the best fix: drain it out. They cut open a vein, sometimes from your forearm, sometimes behind the knee, sometimes your neck, and they let the blood flow into a bowl, counting the drips like it's a sacred rite. No anesthesia, no sterilization, just pressure and prayers. If you faint, that's a sign it's working. If you die, well, God's will. And hey, sometimes you don't even get the fancy knife. Sometimes it's just a leech. One right on the skin, left to drink until it swells like a bloated raisin. You'll feel lightheaded. That's normal. You might hallucinate. That's also normal. Probably. Let's say you survive that. Congratulations, you're still not cured. Next stop, potions. Now, these aren't exactly FDA approved. Your local apothecary might mix you a delightful blend of crushed emerald, pigeon droppings, powdered bones, and a splash of rose water for fragrance. One recipe for plague prevention included roasted frogs, crushed pearls, and human sweat. Another called for drinking a broth made from unicorn horn. Spoiler, it was just narwhal tusk. Also, it didn't work. You're also told to carry sweet-smelling herbs in a little pouch, a pomander, to purify the air, which, in fairness, probably helped a bit with the stench, but not with the fever that's currently making you see double. And if the local herbalist can't help, time to visit the monastery. Monks kept some of the most detailed medical texts of the era. They grew healing herbs, made balms, wrote books, but they also believed deeply in spiritual causes for illness. So alongside sage compresses and vinegar washes, you might be prescribed prayers, fasting, or sleeping near a saint's bones. The line between medicine and miracle was thin, and sometimes non-existent. One particularly fun treatment for persistent pain involved strapping a dead toad to your belly. No, it didn't do anything, but it gave everyone something to talk about. If things get really bad, you might even try surgery. But brace yourself. There are no antiseptics, no painkillers, no clean instruments. A tooth extraction involves a pair of iron tongs and someone to hold you down. Removing a cyst? Bite a stick and scream into the dirt. Even battlefield surgeries, where speed is essential, involve a lot of cauterizing. That means they take a red-hot iron and press it into the wound, not to heal it, to seal it shut, because sewing up flesh with a dirty needle was actually more dangerous. Now let's imagine you get lucky. You recover. Sort of. Your joints ache when it rains. Your hands tremble. You've lost a few teeth. You're alive, yes, but the illness left fingerprints all over your bones. Medieval medicine rarely cured. It just gave you a fighting chance to linger. Quirky side note, one popular belief held that headaches could be cured by drilling a hole into your skull. Trepanation. It sounds made up. It isn't. They used a small hand-cranked drill to relieve pressure from evil spirits. The procedure sometimes worked, in that the patient survived. Sometimes. But don't worry, they usually let you drink first. And if you're really unlucky, you're misdiagnosed as possessed, or cursed, or in league with dark forces, especially if you're a woman, especially if you're poor, especially if you know which mushrooms not to eat. Suddenly, your fever isn't a disease, it's a sign. and now people look at you sideways in the market. Children whisper. The priest avoids eye contact. Because the boundary between illness and heresy, razor thin. It's worth remembering, most people weren't stupid. They did their best with what they had. A healer might not know the word bacteria, but she knew which leaves soothed burns and which bark helped a cough. She just didn't have penicillin, or microscopes, or the luxury of trial runs. Every patient was the experiment. Every body was a gamble. And in the end, most of it came down to this: don't get sick. Because if you do, you bleed. You boil. You pray. And then you wait. Yeah. Your hands are raw, not sore. Raw, split open from frost, rubbed down by rope, burned from cooking pots, blistered from tools that never quite fit your grip. You can't afford gloves. You can barely afford bread. But none of that matters, because the rooster crowed, the sun rose, and the field is waiting. Again, welcome to your job. Actually, it's not even your job. It's the Lord's. You're just renting your right to breathe near it. The word job is misleading. In medieval Europe, your role isn't something you choose. It's handed down from father to son, mother to daughter, shackled to your bloodline like a legacy of bruises. If you're a peasant, you stay a peasant. That's it. If you're a serf, which is like a peasant, but with more obligations and fewer rights, you're legally part of the land. You can't leave. You're not hired. You're inherited. Most people farm. And by farm, we mean bend over in cold mud for 12 hours, using a wooden plow dragged by an animal that hates you. The soil is thin. The tools are worse. You're at war with rocks, wind, and worms. One bad frost can wipe out your whole year. And if you don't meet your Lord's quota, you owe him anyway, because the earth doesn't care if you're tired. Historians still argue whether medieval agricultural life was sustainable or a constant spiral of desperation. The answer depends on the century and the weather. But let's say you're not a farmer. Let's say you work in a trade. Maybe you're a thatcher, a tanner, a blacksmith. Maybe you make nails or shoes or soap that smells like boiled sheep heads. There's no safety net here. No labor laws. No, take a day off. If you lose a finger, you bandage it with wool, grit your teeth, and finish the job one-handed. Or someone else gets the work. And some trades? Downright cursed. Take tanners, for example. Those who process animal hides. First, you soak the hides in urine to loosen the hair. Yes, human urine, collected from neighborhood chamber pots. Then you scrape the skins with knives until your arms cramp. Then you soak them in animal brains. That's right, brain matter. Turns out it's full of tannins. And the smell? It follows you forever. People cross the street to avoid you. Dogs chase you. Children whisper, "Devil man," when you walk by. But it's a living. Sort of. Or maybe you're a chimney sweep. You're 10 years old, tops. Small enough to crawl inside narrow brick flues and scrape out soot with your fingernails. One wrong move and you fall. Or get stuck. Or suffocate. But at least it keeps you warm. One fringe tidbit that haunts historians: bread making could be lethal. Mill dust mixed with air and fire could cause an explosion. Yes, the medieval kitchen could literally blow up. And then there are the miners. God help the miners. They crawl into wet tunnels with oil lamps and hand picks, digging for salt, tin, or silver. There's no ventilation, no helmets, Just splinters of light, coughing fits, and the constant risk of the whole tunnel collapsing like a folding chair. If you die down there, your body might stay buried with the ore you were after. Think of it as job loyalty. Let's not forget guild apprentices. If you're training under a master, say to be a carpenter, you're not just learning a craft, you're also his servant. You sleep on his floor. You clean his chamber pot. You do whatever he says, whenever he says it. If you mess up, you get hit. If you complain, you're out. And there's no plan B. Some jobs are cleaner. Scribes, for instance, copying manuscripts by candlelight in monasteries. But clean doesn't mean safe. Your eyes go bad by 20. Your spine curves. And if you make a single mistake on a holy text, that's not a typo. That's blasphemy. That's kneel in the snow and pray for your soul territory. And oh, let's talk pay. You rarely see coins. Most of your wages come in grain, eggs, or favors. Maybe your landlord forgives a week's rent. Maybe he doesn't. You might toil for 12 hours and walk home with a handful of onions and a sore back. That's assuming there is work. Because when winter comes, or war, or plague, jobs vanish. Overnight. Whole towns go quiet, trade routes shut down, the market empties. And now you're not just poor. You're irrelevant. That's the real danger in the medieval economy. Not dying, but being forgotten. And if you think the nobility have it easier, well, yes and no. Knights train their whole lives to swing heavy metal sticks while wearing 60 pounds of armor. They break bones for sport. They go off to war and either die gloriously or return full of arrows and early onset arthritis. Nobles have jobs too, like managing estates, arranging marriages, navigating court drama. They just do it while wearing velvet and pretending they aren't also terrified of famine and plague. Women, of course, get the usual deal. Cook, clean, birth, repeat. They might work as midwives, weavers, or herbalists, but their labor is either unpaid or underpaid. And if they do it too well, people whisper, "Witch." You can guess how that ends. So you drag your body through another day, another wound, another slip in the mud, another frozen toe, another cough that starts deep in the lungs and never quite leaves. And through it all, the bell tolls. Morning, noon, night. Not for breaks, for obedience. A reminder that time isn't yours. It belongs to the land, the church, the lords, the weather. You keep moving because there's no choice. No days off, no early retirement. No OSHA poster in the bakery saying, "Your safety is our priority." Your safety is an afterthought. Your exhaustion is expected. Your job? It doesn't ask if you're ready. It just begins. It starts with a dull ache in your jaw. Nothing serious, just annoying. Maybe it's from chewing stale bread too hard. You press your fingers to the side of your face, massage the skin, feel a strange little knot forming just beneath the surface. You spit in the dirt. There's blood. That's when you realize this isn't going away. Toothache in medieval Europe isn't just a nuisance. It's a looming executioner, tapping its fingers, waiting. Dental care doesn't exist. Toothbrushes are twigs. Mouthwash is wine, if you're fancy. And toothpaste, if you can call it that, is a crumbly mix of ash, salt, and powdered herbs that feels like you're scrubbing your gums with sand. You might not even know why your teeth hurt. Bacteria is a word that hasn't been invented. You assume your tooth is angry. Maybe you're being punished. Maybe you slept on the wrong side of the bed. Maybe it's demons again. Those tend to get blamed for everything. So what do? You go see the tooth man, not a dentist. That profession won't truly exist for another few hundred years. You go to the barber surgeon, the same guy who cuts hair, drains blood, amputates toes, and possibly sells pig livers on the side. He's a multitasker. He doesn't ask questions. He just squints, grabs a pair of iron tongs, and says something reassuring like, "Hold still." Historians still debate whether some barber surgeons had formal training or just a high pain tolerance and strong forearms. Either way, you're in for a ride. The tool clinks on your enamel. He pulls. You scream. It doesn't come out. He twists. You pass out. When you wake up, the tooth is gone, along with part of your gum. Blood is caked on your chin. He tells you to rinse with vinegar. You do. It burns like betrayal. And now, there's a crater in your mouth that won't heal for weeks. You avoid solid food. Your breath smells like you've been kissing a fireplace. If you're lucky, the wound closes. If you're not, it gets infected. And that infection, it can spread to your jaw, your brain, your blood. In modern times, you'd go to urgent care. In medieval Europe, you just fade. One fringe remedy from the time involved stuffing a roasted onion into your cheek. Another suggested rubbing your gums with crushed emerald. But since you probably can't afford an emerald, it's back to onion therapy and desperate prayers. Tooth pain wasn't rare. It was expected. People's mouths were full of rot by age 30. Gums were swollen. Molars cracked like dry wood. Smiles were a luxury. And let's not even talk about breath. If you've ever smelled week-old ale mixed with trench water, you're halfway there. And it's not just your teeth, it's the whole mouth system. Let's say you get an abscess, a pocket of pus tucked behind a molar, swelling, fever, pain so sharp it makes your vision blur. What now? You could lance it. Yourself. With a needle heated over a fire. It'll drain. You'll cry. Maybe it helps. Maybe it opens a deeper infection and your jaw starts turning black. Welcome to osteomyelitis, a bone infection. Your jawbone can rot, and it happens faster than you'd think. The pain is constant, blinding. You can't eat. You can't sleep. You moan through the night like a ghost. And people start to keep their distance, not just because you smell like swamp rot, but because pain this intense must be the devil's work. Sometimes your friends tie a rag around your head to keep your jaw stable. It doesn't help, but it looks comforting, like you're trying. One grim historical note: some monasteries recorded entire sections of their infirmaries filled with tooth sufferers. People curled in straw mats, rocking back and forth, clutching their faces. There was no cure, only clove oil, chance, and resignation. Clove oil, in fact, was one of the few things that sort of worked. It numbs the nerves. But getting it? Not easy. It's imported. Pricey. You trade your best goat for one little vial, and half the time it's diluted with olive oil and lies. Your diet doesn't help. Remember, everything you eat is either hard, coarse, or questionably alive. You gnaw on crusty bread, suck on bones, chew jerky like it's a punishment. No one tells you about soft food or vitamins, and you're not getting any calcium, unless you count the dirt that flakes into your soup. One open scholarly debate: whether people in rural areas had better teeth due to simpler diets or worse teeth due to total lack of care. The evidence is messy. Skulls show signs of both. Perfect molars in some, shattered wreckage in others. It seems to depend on luck, grain type, and how many rocks were in your bread that year. Let's say you make it to old age. A miracle. You've still probably lost most of your teeth. There are no dentures. You just gum your food, slurp your ale, and nod politely while others talk. Your smile looks like a burnt picket fence. And you know what? That might still be better than those who tried the early fake teeth made from animal bones. Or, get this, dead people's teeth. Harvested from corpses, fitted into wooden frames, glued in place with wax. Eat your porridge, Grandma. Don't mind the rattling. So next time you think about skipping the dentist, just imagine a smoky room, a rusted hook, a cloth to bite down on, and a man with no eyebrows asking you to lean back and say, "Ah." You'd take fluoride over fire any day. Nee. The trees are bare. The wind stings like glass. And your stomach feels like it's folding in on itself. It's winter in medieval Europe, which really just means hunger with extra steps. You pull your cloak tighter, but it's too thin. The fire's already out. There's no wood left. You burned the furniture last week. This is the season of waiting. Waiting for something to grow. Waiting for the frost to break. Waiting for food to appear like a miracle, because it certainly won't appear from the field. The earth is locked, frozen, dead, like everything else. And you're just trying not to join it. See, hunger wasn't a visitor, it was a roommate. You lived with it year-round, but winter was its favorite time to scream in your ear. Because once the harvest was gone, and let's be honest, it was never abundant, you entered what they called the starving time. It could last months, and every day was a gamble. There's no pantry, no fridge, no emergency canned beans, just salted meat, pickled vegetables, dried roots, and maybe a sad sack of oats that smells faintly of mouse droppings. If you had a bad harvest or your lord demanded more than you could spare, you're out of luck before December even starts. And no, you can't just hunt. That deer you spotted last week, the one you daydreamed about roasting, it belongs to the king. All game does. Poaching means jail at best, mutilation, or death at worst. Even rabbits, even squirrels, all illegal. So you make stew, and then water it down, and then do it again. Eventually, your stew is just hot water with a twig in it. You chew slowly, pretending it has flavor. You feed your children first. You tell them stories so they forget they're starving. You lie, kindly. You say your stomach is already full. You say tomorrow will be better. Historians still argue about the worst famine years, but some of the most infamous, like the Great Famine of 1315-1317, wiped out entire regions. It rained nonstop for months. Crops rotted, roads flooded, grain spoiled, and the hunger, it spread faster than any army. During those years, people boiled grass. They chewed on tree bark. They ground down acorns and mixed them with sawdust to stretch their bread. That's not a metaphor. Sawdust bread was real. It filled your belly but scraped your insides raw. A fringe detail. In some villages, people dug up buried animals to eat. Dogs, horses, even moles. Meat was meat. And when that ran out, things got darker. Skeletons found in old famine pits show clear signs of, let's say, unapproved protein sourcing. Desperate people do desperate things. And then spring comes. Ah, spring, renewal, life, flowers. Except no, not yet, because early spring is worse. That's when the food really runs out. Your winter stores are gone, but the new crops haven't grown. It's the hunger gap. Days stretch into weeks. You dream of carrots. You cry over spilled barley. You would trade a sibling for a single fresh egg. Even if you do have something to plant, you're gambling. Because one storm, one cold snap, one freak frost, and it's over. All your work ruined. You start again, or you don't. And then there's summer. Finally some sun, some warmth, maybe even a peach. But summer has its own price. Water becomes scarce. Rivers shrink. Wells dry up. Heat bakes the land until it cracks. And you? You keep sweating. Keep hauling. Keep praying the crops survive long enough to make it to harvest. But pests come too. Locusts, beetles, worms, rats. Always rats. They sniff out your stores and feast before you can. And if you catch one stealing your grain, you thank it, because at least you've got dinner now. Some years, even the sun betrays you. In 1258, a massive volcanic eruption, possibly from Mount Semalis in Indonesia, sent dust into the atmosphere and triggered a global cooling event. In Europe, it meant cold summers, failed harvests, and widespread starvation. People didn't know why. They just knew God was angry again. Even the rain hurts you. A good storm waters the crops. A bad one drowns them. Fields turn to swamps. Roads become rivers. And all the while, your shoes are falling apart and your cloak is more holes than wool. And famine isn't just physical. It twists your brain. You start seeing food where there is none. A muddy root becomes a roast duck in your mind. Hunger makes you mean. Bitter. Hopeless. Families fight over crumbs. Neighbors hoard and steal. You start wondering what a leather belt tastes like. Spoiler. Bad. One eerie medical term from later centuries, famine tongue, described the black, cracked, swollen tongues of people who'd been starving too long. In the medieval world, it would have just been called Tuesday. Sometimes the church offers help. Monasteries grow food. Rich nobles donate grain. But it's never enough. Charity runs thin. And anyway, it's hard to be generous when your own table is empty. And if a famine overlaps with disease, game over. Because hunger makes your body weak, vulnerable. A simple fever becomes lethal. A cough turns into a death sentence. A scratch becomes infected, and you can't fight it off. So no, summer doesn't save you. It just teases you. Like a cruel older sibling, dangling a fruit over your head, then dropping it in the dirt. You live like this year after year, season after season. Hope becomes a superstition. Hunger becomes a friend, a shadow, a whisper that never leaves. You learn to eat slowly, to imagine flavors that aren't there, to drink boiled water like it's broth, to be grateful for anything with a little crunch. And one day, a miracle, you find a turnip. Not a fresh one, not a clean one, but it's food. And for a few minutes, you chew like a king. It begins with a whisper. Someone's pig goes missing. A neighbor's grain store catches fire. A child claims to have seen a shadow in the woods. A man with no face. Then someone gets caught stealing bread. Then someone gets accused of lying. And just like that, the entire village becomes a courtroom. Justice in medieval Europe isn't blind. It's blindfolded, dizzy, and swinging a club at anything that twitches. There are no rights. There's no lawyer. There's no Miranda warning. Just fear, suspicion, and something sharp tied to a pole. Let's say someone accuses you of theft. It doesn't take much. A rumor, a missing goat, a bad look at the wrong time. Suddenly, the village reeve, basically the sheriff, is knocking on your door with 3 strong lads and a rope. You don't get a trial, you get a crowd. Historians still debate how widespread formal court systems were outside major cities, but for the average villager, justice usually came in 2 flavors: humiliation and pain. First, there's public shaming. Stocks in the square. Hands through the holes, feet bound, your head sticking out like a roast on display. People throw things. Vegetables, insults, the occasional dead animal. You're expected to take it, to reflect, to repent, but mostly to entertain. And then there's real punishment. Let's talk torture. Because even if you protest, even if you scream your innocence until your throat turns dry and your eyes go glassy, someone will still say, well, let's see what the hot iron says. Trial by ordeal was a real thing. There were many versions, all worse than the last. Trial by fire. You hold a red-hot iron bar for several paces. Then they wrap your hand and wait a few days. If it's healing, you're innocent. If it's infected, guilty. Also, dead. Trial by water. You're tied up and thrown into a pond. If you sink, you're innocent, but you might drown. If you float, you're guilty. Because water, being pure, rejects the wicked. Yes, logic like a squirrel on a unicycle. Trial by combat. You fight your accuser, even if they're stronger, even if you're sick. God, they believed, will give victory to the righteous. That's comforting until your jaw meets a cudgel. One fringe variation. Trial by bread. You had to eat a chunk of dry bread and swallow it without choking. If you gagged, you were guilty. Clearly, divine justice hates gluten. And for those already convicted, oh, the punishments were creative. You could be branded, fingers removed, tongue pierced, ears cropped, or forced to wear a heavy iron collar that rang with every step, announcing you as a criminal wherever you went, like a medieval shame bell. Sometimes you were whipped, sometimes pilloried, sometimes you were broken. Not metaphorically, literally. The breaking wheel, also known as the Catherine wheel, was reserved for the worst crimes, or at least the worst moods. The victim was tied to a cartwheel. The executioner would then break the limbs with a hammer, weaving the shattered arms and legs between the spokes. You'd be left there to die, slowly, publicly, symbolically. Some say it was a warning. Others say it was just cruelty disguised as ceremony. And what about confessions? Well, if you didn't confess, they'd just torture you until you did. The rack stretches your body like taffy. The thumbscrew crushes bone like dried twigs. The pear of anguish, don't Google that one, was inserted into various orifices and then expanded. One historian joked, darkly, that medieval torture devices were the original multi-tools. Good for truth, punishment, or pure intimidation. If you think this only happened to criminals, think again. Gossip, debt, jealousy, all could land you in the wrong kind of spotlight, especially if you were foreign, or a woman, or just weird. In one recorded case, a man was executed for dancing during a funeral. Another, a woman was beaten because she refused to stop talking back in church. People were thrown in rivers for sneezing at the wrong time, or burned for owning 3 cats. It didn't take much, just a little fear, a little fire, and a crowd eager for a spectacle. Sometimes you didn't even get accused. You were just nearby when something went wrong. Wrong place, wrong plague, wrong shoes. And if the church got involved, now it's not just a crime, it's a sin. Heretics were treated with a special kind of attention. You could be fined, imprisoned, exiled, or executed, usually by burning. Fire was seen as cleansing. Also public. The crowd would gather. Children would sit on shoulders. The smell of charred flesh would cling to the wind like a ghost. And people would go home thinking justice had been served. Or at least that someone else had paid the price. And here's the darkest part. Sometimes the accused were innocent. Genuinely. Entirely. But confession under torture was so common, so expected, that truth became irrelevant. If you screamed loud enough, they believed you, or at least stopped caring. Because justice wasn't about right or wrong. It was about order, about fear, about reminding everyone else what happens if you step out of line. So you learn to keep your head down. You avoid eye contact. You don't speak out of turn. You don't touch things that aren't yours. You don't whistle near churches or carry strange herbs or know too much about astrology. You sleep with one eye open. You pray loudly, often, and in Latin, even if you don't understand it. Because in medieval Europe, silence isn't golden. It's survival. The feast is over. The candles gutter. The cold creeps back in. And somewhere in the back room of a creaking cottage, a young girl no older than 12 is being told she'll be married next week to a man 3 times her age. He has land after all, and strong oxen. Love? That's not part of the story. Marriage in medieval Europe isn't about romance. It's about property, politics, and alliances. A deal signed with sheep, sealed with ale, and seldom spoken of again. If you're lucky, you get someone kind. If you're not, you get someone who doesn't notice when you cry. And you probably don't cry too loudly, because there's no I don't in this world. Only you will. For peasants, marriage is practical. The goal is survival. You need help tilling the fields, raising livestock, making sure someone's there to pull your lifeless body out of the well if you fall in. Romantic compatibility? That's as useful as a silver spoon in a famine. You marry who your parents say. You marry when your parents say. And if they're gone, then your Lord decides. Historians still argue how young was too young. But records show girls marrying as early as 12, boys around 14. The church often preferred older teens, but social pressure usually won, especially if there was a dowry involved, or a good goat, or a cow with no limp. Let's say you're that girl. 12, barely old enough to braid your hair, and suddenly, your family is dressing you in second-hand linens, brushing your teeth with wine and sage, and promising you to someone named Oswald, who has all his fingers and a new plowshare. You ask if he's nice. They say, he's not dead, that's nice. The wedding itself? Less glitz, more grit. Forget flowers or flowing gowns. You're standing in a church, maybe a barn, hands trembling, heart racing. You repeat words you don't understand, nod when you're told, and then it's done. Congratulations, you're someone's wife now. Your duties start immediately. Cooking, cleaning, bearing children, raising them, losing some, bearing more. You'll be pregnant most of your adult life, often while still recovering from the last birth. There's no maternity leave, no midwife unless you're lucky, no pain relief except biting down on cloth and praying not to hemorrhage. And if your husband dies, you become property again, just reshuffled. Maybe his brother takes you, maybe a neighbor, maybe no one. Then you become a burden. A widow with children is pitied. A widow without them, suspicious. If you're a noble woman, your life is fancier, but no freer. Marriages are strategic, often arranged at birth. You're a pawn in a chess game of bloodlines. Your virginity is monitored more closely than royal treasure. You might be traded between kingdoms like fine fabric, expected to cement alliances with your womb. Want a real story? Eleanor of Aquitaine was married to the King of France, then annulled and married the King of England, all while managing armies, birthing 10 children, and surviving multiple imprisonments. She was extraordinary, which is just a fancy way of saying she was the exception. Because most women had no voice, no choice, and no recourse. Let's say your husband is cruel, drinks too much, hits too hard, cheats. You go to the church. They nod. Say, patience is a virtue. Maybe suggest fasting. Maybe suggest prayer. But leaving? Divorce? Not happening. You are bound till death do us part. And sometimes death is the only way out. One fringe medieval belief claimed that tying knots into your wedding linens would prevent infidelity. Another, that placing iron scissors under your pillow kept your husband faithful. Spoiler, it didn't work. Men, of course, had more freedom. They could remarry, take mistresses, demand obedience. Some laws even allowed moderate correction, meaning you could beat your wife so long as you didn't kill her. Generous. In many places, marital rape wasn't even a concept, because once married, a woman's body was no longer her own. Her consent, pre-signed at the altar. Let's pivot to the economics. Marriage is expensive. There's the dowry, a payment from the bride's family to the groom. It could be land, livestock, tools, or coins. No dowry? Fewer suitors. No suitors? You might be sent to a convent, or just left behind. A spinster, a burden, a target. Sometimes dowries were so crucial that families would starve themselves just to scrape one together. Selling blankets, selling daughters, sometimes both. And if you're a second or third daughter, good luck. Your plan B may be plan C. Some girls chose the convent. It offered food, shelter, books, and a life beyond childbirth. But don't romanticize it too much. It also came with freezing cells, strict discipline, and a daily schedule that made fieldwork look like a vacation. Men, for their part, didn't get it easy either. Marriage meant responsibility. More mouths to feed, more bodies to clothe, more taxes to pay. A single bad harvest could mean starvation for your entire family. Your wife looks to you. Your children cry at night, and you start to resent the very people you love. So why marry at all? Because you had to, because society expected it, because lineage mattered, because two people could suffer slightly less than one alone. And if you were gay, or uninterested, or just not cut out for the whole till death arrangement. Too bad. No options, no language for it, no mercy. You marry. You bear. You fade. There are love stories, of course. Couples who found joy, comfort, even tenderness. But those were rare, accidental, like finding a flower growing out of a skull. In medieval Europe, marriage wasn't the beginning of a love story. It was the start of a contract. One signed in dirt, bound in duty, and paid for, often in silence. The bell rings. Again. You can't see it, but you hear it. Dull and hollow, like it's calling out through fog. Which it is. It's Tuesday, or maybe Friday, and you're behind on your tithes again. 10% of everything. Crops, wool, chickens, coin. Even if you barely have enough to eat, the church still expects its cut. Because in medieval Europe, you don't just pay taxes to your Lord. You pay them to God. Well, to the men who speak for Him. Welcome to the church, the single most powerful institution in your world. It owns land, controls time. Literally, the calendar is built around it, educates the elite, and governs your soul from birth to grave. Baptism? Church. Marriage? Church. Burial? Definitely church. And if you die without its approval, you might not even get that. They say the church offers peace, hope, salvation. And sure, sometimes it does. A warm chapel on a cold night. A song in a language you don't understand, but still feel in your bones. A kind priest who listens. Those moments matter, but they are flickers. Because mostly, the church is fear in a robe. Let's break it down. You're told from the moment you can walk that life is a test, that suffering is good, that joy is suspicious, that if you sin, and sin too much, and forget to confess, and die without absolution, you burn. Forever. Not metaphorically, not poetically. Literally, flames, screaming, for eternity. And what's a sin? Oh, anything really. Eating meat on the wrong day, missing mass, wearing clothes that are too nice, speaking out of turn, coveting your neighbor's cow, thinking a naughty thought, thinking any thought sometimes. It's like walking through a minefield barefoot while blindfolded, and the map changes daily. But don't worry, the church offers help. There are indulgences, basically forgiveness for sale. Pay a fee and reduce your time in purgatory. A bribe for the afterlife. The richer you are, the shorter your sentence. Poor folks? You'll be there a while. Better bring a snack. Historians still argue whether the medieval church was more concerned with salvation or domination. The answer is probably both. They built cathedrals that scraped the sky, funded by peasants who couldn't afford shoes. They carved saints into stone while villagers starved in the shadow of the altar. They said the body was filthy, but wore gold on their fingers. They preached humility from pulpits made of marble. And don't even think about questioning them. Because questioning the church is heresy. And heresy burns. Literally. Let's say you say something small. You wonder aloud if maybe tithing doesn't feel fair. Or that maybe the priest shouldn't own more sheep than the rest of the village combined. Or that maybe you don't understand why you have to confess your sins to a man who drinks more ale than your uncle. Suddenly, you're not curious, you're suspicious. Someone tells someone, the priest visits, you're spoken to, then watched, then maybe dragged in front of the bishop for clarification. And if you stumble, if you panic, if you say the wrong thing, you confess or you burn, or both. A quirky little fact: some churches sold certificates proving you weren't a heretic, like a medieval hall pass for theology. Keep it close, wave it often. The church doesn't just own your soul, it owns time. Days are structured around holy hours. Bells mark prayer, work, rest. There's a saint for everything, a festival for every month. But heaven help you if you work on a feast day. That's a sin, even if your child's hungry, even if your cow's dying. And knowledge? The church controls that too. Books are handwritten by monks in Latin. If you can't read Latin, and you probably can't, you rely entirely on priests to tell you what Scripture says. You trust that they're telling the truth. You hope they are. They say Eve sinned first, so women bear the weight of sin. They say saints bled for you, so you should be willing to do the same. They say heaven is beautiful, but you're too filthy to get in without their help. You believe them because you have to, and sometimes it's not all bad. Monasteries care for the sick. They copy texts, preserve ancient knowledge. Monks grow herbs, feed the poor. Nuns teach. Not every clergyman is corrupt. Not every bishop is a tyrant. But the structure itself, rigid, towering, untouchable. And when the church wants something, it takes it. Land, children, gold, loyalty, blood. It launches crusades, holy wars, to retake Jerusalem. Knights march under banners of faith. Entire villages disappear in the name of God. The Pope blesses it. The church says it's holy. You cheer or pretend to, because to speak against a crusade is to speak against heaven. Even science bows to the church. If you say the earth moves around the sun, that's heresy. If you claim the body works with natural rules, not divine balance, heresy. If you suggest that the stars aren't angels poking holes in the sky, heresy. And yet, people whisper in corners, behind barns, secret thinkers, hidden texts, careful doubt. Because sometimes the fear wears thin, and underneath it, curiosity, hope, a question that won't go away. But until then, you keep your head down. You tithe, you pray, you fear, and you die. With a priest at your side, a coin on your tongue, and a hope that maybe you gave enough. The smell hits first, a blend of smoke, burning hair, and something else, something meatier. The crowd has already gathered. Children sit on their parents' shoulders. Bread sellers pass through, hawking their wares like it's a festival. But it's not a feast. It's an execution. Someone is about to die, not because they stole or killed or even lied, but because they believed wrong. In medieval Europe, belief is dangerous. The wrong belief can cost you everything, because the church doesn't just want obedience, it wants uniformity. Everyone must agree, must follow, must kneel at the same altar with the same words in the same rhythm. Step outside that rhythm, you're a heretic. And heretics burn. Literally. Let's say you're different. You question the nature of the Trinity. Or you say salvation doesn't come from indulgences. Or you believe God speaks to you directly, without a priest. Maybe you read a Bible someone translated into your own language because Latin feels too far from your heart. Maybe you just say it out loud, that you don't understand why Christ would want war. That's enough. You're labeled, watched, reported, hauled in front of an inquisitor. The Inquisition. Now there's a name that chills through centuries. Historians still debate whether its worst excesses were centralized or local, but for many it was personal. The knock on the door, the questions, the whispered threats, the smell of ink and sweat and old parchment, the slow pressure of fear closing in. They didn't have to torture you, but they often did. They didn't need evidence, just rumor. And they didn't have to kill you, not technically. The church would hand you to the secular arm for punishment. A little legal sleight of hand, as if they were just concerned citizens watching the state do the dirty work. But the stake was waiting. Dry wood stacked neatly, a rope to hold you in place, not too tight. That might kill you quickly. This is supposed to be instructional, a public demonstration, a fire sermon. And you scream, because you're human, and because you're afraid, not just of death, but of what might happen after. You've been told your soul is damned, that the flames here are only the beginning. You're not just dying, you're being erased. And the crowd watches. Some cheer, some cry, some do both, because this fire is supposed to protect them, to keep the world orderly. But deep down, everyone knows it could be them next. You didn't have to be a heretic to die for belief. You just had to be accused. Jewish communities across Europe faced wave after wave of persecution, blamed for everything from bad harvests to poisoned wells. During the Black Death, entire Jewish neighborhoods were wiped out, burned, drowned, expelled, all because they didn't worship the right way, to the right God, with the right rituals. One horrifying fringe event? In 1349, during the plague, nearly 2,000 Jews were burned alive in Strasbourg, not because they were sick, but because they weren't. People suspected they had caused the disease, because they weren't dying enough. There was no logic, just terror. And then there were witches. Ah, the classic scapegoat. A woman who knew herbs, or spoke to herself, or had too many cats. She gets accused of cursing cows, withering crops, or making someone sneeze in church. Suddenly, she's being ducked in the river, tied to a chair. If she floats, she's guilty. If she sinks, she's innocent. But either way, she's drowned. The church didn't always lead witch trials, but it certainly didn't stop them. And local leaders were more than happy to step in, swinging torches in superstition like battering rams. And then there were the Crusades. Wars of belief. Holy bloodbaths. Men marched under crosses to reclaim the Holy Land. But on the way, they sacked cities, killed entire populations, and left fields soaked in red. Belief was the sword. Faith was the fuel. Salvation was promised to anyone who killed for the Lord. Even children were caught up in it. The Children's Crusade, a mix of myth and tragedy, supposedly sent thousands of boys and girls marching to the sea, believing the waters would part. They never made it. Most died. Others were sold into slavery. All in the name of belief. Faith in medieval Europe wasn't private. It was political, military, violent, and there was no way to opt out. Even silence was suspicious. Let's say you don't go to church. Maybe you're grieving. Maybe you're sick. Maybe you just don't feel like it. The neighbors notice. The priest calls. You're warned. Then fined. Then maybe flogged. Or worse, excommunicated. And in this world, excommunication is a death sentence. It means no sacraments, no marriage, no burial, no afterlife. Your soul floats untethered. Your body rots in unconsecrated ground. You become unclean, unremembered, untouchable. Even kings weren't safe. Entire rulers were excommunicated. Their lands declared cursed. Their people absolved of loyalty. Popes held real power. And when they pointed, people fell. And yet, belief endured. People still prayed, still built chapels with calloused hands, still carved angels into wood and whispered hope into candlelight. They needed something to hold on to, something beyond the mud and blood and cold. Belief hurt people, but it also held them up. A contradiction wrapped in incense and stone. So when the next bell tolls, you cross yourself, kneel, whisper a prayer in Latin you don't understand. Because maybe, just maybe, it'll keep the fire away from your door. A cough. That's how it starts. Nothing dramatic, just a dry, tickling cough echoing in the dark. A child stirs in her sleep. A mother frowns, but says nothing. It's cold after all. Everyone coughs in the cold. By morning, the child is burning with fever. Her eyes are glassy, her lips dry. Her tiny chest rattles like a loose shutter in the wind. No one panics, not yet. Because in medieval Europe, children die. All the time. There are no baby monitors, no pediatricians, no emergency rooms glowing behind automatic doors. There's a wooden spoon, a pot of boiling water, and whatever herbs you can find. Maybe a charm around the neck. Maybe a whispered prayer. It's not neglect, it's reality. If you're born poor, and almost everyone is, you have to fight to survive your own birth. Midwives are experienced, yes, but they don't have sterile tools or antiseptics, or even consistent knowledge of how childbirth works. It's all instinct, tradition, and guesswork. If the baby is breech, if the cord wraps around its neck, if the mother bleeds too much, you lose one. Sometimes both. Sometimes all. Historians estimate that up to half of all children in medieval Europe died before reaching age 5. Let that sink in. Every family carries ghosts. Every household has a name they never speak, a cradle never needed. But even if a child does survive, that's when the real work begins. They don't get to be children the way we think of it. There are no toys, no kindergarten, no curious questions answered with a smile. From the moment they can walk, they're useful, or they're a burden. At age 5 or 6, they're put to work. Boys follow their fathers to the fields, or into the woods to gather firewood, or to the village well to haul water in buckets twice their size. Girls help their mothers with laundry, cooking, spinning thread, feeding animals, watching younger siblings. By 10, you're doing nearly adult labor, just with smaller, aching hands. There's no time for wonder, no space for dreams. You're not learning to read unless you're nobility. You're learning to count eggs, patch roofs, and avoid the eyes of drunks in the tavern. And if you show curiosity, say about stars or herbs, or why the priest keeps talking about fire and brimstone, someone will likely tell you to hush. Curiosity leads to questions. Questions lead to danger. Still, children find ways. They play sometimes. A carved stick becomes a sword. A bit of twine turns into a doll. They race, wrestle, tell riddles in the mud. They laugh, thin, fast laughter, like birdsong between storms. But always, death looms nearby. One bad winter, and half the children in the village vanish. A coughing sickness, a poisoned well, a pig that kicks too hard. A simple cut becomes infected. A dog bite goes rabid. A fever takes a brother overnight. And when a child dies, there are no therapy sessions, no grief counselors. You bury them in the churchyard, if you can afford the space, and return to work. You keep going, because you must. Sometimes babies aren't even named until weeks after birth. Not out of cruelty, but caution. Why name what might not stay? A fringe tradition from some rural areas? Swaddling infants so tightly they could barely move. Not just to keep them warm, but to keep them quiet. A crying baby could attract wolves. Or worse, humans with bad intentions. And when you hit puberty, the pressure increases. If you're a boy, you might be apprenticed, sent away to live with a craftsman. You sleep in the workshop, eat scraps, work until your fingers bleed. Maybe years later you'll have your own trade. Maybe not. If you're a girl, your body becomes public property. Not literally, but in gossip, in scrutiny, inappropriate behavior. Everyone watches. Your mother hisses warnings. Your father sharpens his blade and eyes every boy with suspicion, because a girl who steps out of line, who laughs too loudly, dances too freely, talks back, risks shame, or worse. And what about play? Play is a luxury. Some noble children had toys. Little knights carved from wood, dolls with tiny clothes, maybe even a hobby horse. But peasants made do with what they had. Stones became dice. Bones were used for games. Yes, literal animal bones. A game called Knucklebones was an early version of jacks. Some children even played mock battles, mimicking the nightly violence they saw from a distance. Because war was always close, and children knew the sound of clashing steel before they knew their own handwriting. One dark anecdote. In some plague years, children played funeral. They built tiny coffins, marched in little processions, buried dolls in the garden. Imitation, or coping. Historians still wonder. And if you were different, shy, slow, ill, the world gave little mercy. A limp? A lisp? A strange way of speaking? People might say you were touched by spirits, or worse, cursed. Changeling was the word they used. A child swapped by fairies, not fully human. Some were abandoned. Others were kept indoors, hidden, shamed. It wasn't hatred, it was fear. People didn't understand illness or difference, and so they whispered, and so they turned away. And yet, somehow, life went on. Children survived. Some grew into adulthood. A few even thrived, became blacksmiths, merchants, mothers, poets. Most faded into the dirt they tilled, remembered only in brittle church records or forgotten headstones. But they laughed, they dreamed, they carried pebbles in their pockets and secrets in their sleeves. They lived, however briefly. And that matters. Because even in the coldest corners of history, even in the mud and the hunger and the fear, childhood still found a way to exist. A stolen moment, a shared crust of bread, a giggle beneath the hay. Tiny rebellions against a world that never expected them to last. The ground trembles, not from an earthquake, though those happen too, but from something far more predictable: marching feet. Metal rattles, hooves strike stone. A banner unfurls in the wind, its colors bold, its edges frayed with old blood. War has arrived again. Because in medieval Europe, war is always coming. Sometimes it's on the horizon, sometimes it's already in your barn. There's no concept of peace as we know it. There are just pauses between violence, brief silences where the wheat grows and the graves settle. The rest of the time, someone is fighting someone, somewhere. Sometimes it's kingdoms, sometimes it's cousins, and sometimes it's your own village turning on itself over a goat. Let's say your lord has a feud with a neighboring baron. You don't know why. Maybe someone insulted someone's wife. Maybe someone's pig wandered across a border. Maybe a priest gave the wrong blessing at the wrong time. Doesn't matter. The soldiers come. They take your livestock, your food, your sons. If you're lucky, they leave you the roof. If you're really lucky, they don't burn the fields. Because war in this era isn't about precision. There are no guided arrows, no careful battle maps, just armor, chaos, and luck. Lots of luck. The knight, yes, the shining symbol of chivalry, is not a romantic hero. He's a tank in human form. 40 to 60 pounds of armor. A war horse trained to bite and kick. A sword as long as your arm and just as sharp. But let's be clear. Most knights don't fight dragons or save maidens. They raid, they pillage, they enforce land disputes, they stomp across villages with absolute authority. And if they die, it's not in a blaze of glory. It's from dysentery in a muddy tent, or from a blow to the head that rattles their skull so hard they forget their own name. One mainstream historical fact: the 100 Years' War between England and France lasted 116 years. Multiple generations grew up knowing only war. Daughters buried fathers, sons buried brothers, then grew up to fight themselves. And what about you, the peasant? You don't get armor, you get a stick, or a farming tool converted into a weapon, a scythe, a pitchfork, maybe a dull sword from a forgotten cousin. You're sent to the front because someone needs bodies to absorb arrows. If you survive, you go home with one eye and a story no one wants to hear. If you don't, you're left in a field unburied, and the crows sing your eulogy. Siege warfare is its own horror show. Castles don't fall in a day. They fall over months, sometimes years. You camp outside with little food, bad water, and worse morale. Disease spreads fast. Morale spreads slow. People start deserting. Inside the castle, not much better. Supplies dwindle. Rats become delicacies. People drink rainwater and pray for a storm. Children cry themselves hoarse. The walls hold, but the people inside begin to crack. Siege engines are brutal. The trebuchet, a glorified gravity-powered flinger, can hurl 200-pound stones, diseased corpses, or barrels of flaming tar over the walls. It's less warfare and more psychological destruction. A quirky historical tidbit. In one documented siege, defenders catapulted beehives onto the attacking army because nothing breaks a charge like a cloud of furious bees. Sometimes mercenaries show up. These are soldiers for hire. No loyalty, just contracts. They fight for whoever pays more. And if the money dries up, they take what they're owed. Pillage, theft, worse. Whole towns are erased because someone's check bounced. And don't forget the religious wars, crusades, holy missions, sanctified slaughter. People march for God, but they die for land. Children are conscripted, villages vanish, monasteries are burned. And all the while someone stands over the carnage holding a cross and saying, "This is righteous." Even when war doesn't reach your doorstep, it still changes you. Your taxes go up to pay for armor you'll never wear. Your grain is seized to feed an army you'll never join. Your peace disappears under the sound of distant drums. Your child plays with sticks and calls them swords. You wake in the night to the phantom scream of a neighbor who never came home. One open scholarly debate? Whether medieval Europe was more war-torn than later eras, or just more brutally honest about it. In truth, it doesn't matter to you, because all you know is the fear in your stomach when riders pass, the silence that follows, and the burning you see on the horizon 2 towns over. You don't write about war. You survive it, or you don't. And if you do, you get no medal, no pension, no thank you. Just the knowledge that it will come again. Because in medieval Europe, war isn't an event. It's the weather. Sometimes it rains arrows. Sometimes it thunders with hooves. But it always comes back. And it never brings peace. Night falls fast here. The sun dips low, and suddenly, your world isn't just dim. It's dangerous. There are no street lights, no porch lamps, no reassuring hum of electricity behind the walls. Just darkness, thick, hungry, waiting. And you? You don't go outside after sunset. Not unless you have to. Not unless you really have to. Because in medieval Europe, the night is not your friend. Let's start with the practical stuff. If you're walking after dusk, you bring a torch or stumble blind into a world where every shadow could be a pit, a root, or a person. Most roads aren't paved. Most paths aren't marked. You think you know your own village. Try finding your way in fog and silence when all the landmarks have turned into silhouettes. And the woods? Forget it. You might as well be walking into another world. One filled with bandits, wolves, and worse. Let's talk bandits. These aren't cartoon highwaymen with witty banter and twirled mustaches. These are desperate, violent men, sometimes women too, who survive by taking. They wait where travelers are slowest, at narrow passes, forest bends, crumbling bridges. They rob you blind. Or worse, don't stop at robbing. And if they get caught, sure, the punishment's harsh. Hanging, branding, mutilation. But most don't get caught. Because the night hides them. Because no one wants to chase shadows through the trees. Then there are wolves. Real ones. Packs that roam just outside the edge of the village. You hear them sometimes. Long howls echoing over the hills, closer than you'd like. They're not afraid of people. Not when they're hungry. And they are hungry. Children vanish. Livestock disappears. One morning, your neighbor finds a trail of blood leading from the pig pen to the woods. They say it was a wolf, or something wearing a wolf's skin. A quirky note from some medieval chronicles. There were widespread reports of werewolves in parts of France and Eastern Europe. Not fiction. Legal records, trials, executions. People genuinely believed that humans could turn under a cursed moon. And why not? Night does strange things to the imagination. Even in towns and cities, darkness is a risk. There are no night patrols, or if there are, they are more afraid than you. Most towns lock their gates at dusk. literally. With heavy iron, you're either in or you're out. No late arrivals, no second chances. So what happens if you're stuck outside? Well, you pray. And you run. Maybe you find shelter in a stable, or under a tree, or in an abandoned hut that smells like mold and old regret. You don't sleep well. Every twig snap jolts you. Every gust sounds like footsteps. Every silence is heavier than the last. And even if no one's out there, something is. Because superstition doesn't sleep. Let's talk ghosts, spirits, restless dead. Medieval people believed in them, not as a maybe, as a fact. The souls of the unbaptized, the murdered, the betrayed, the excommunicated. They wander, pale thin things, weeping in churchyards or rattling chains by crossroads. If your child is born but dies before baptism, people whisper, because that soul has nowhere to go. It lingers. Some even believe those spirits can steal breath from the living just to feel warm again. One fringe tradition, placing iron scissors beneath a child's pillow to keep away night spirits. Another, smearing garlic on doorways, or keeping a sprig of rue in your shoe. You do something, because doing nothing is inviting darkness in. And if the ghosts don't get you, the church might. There were curfews in many cities, not for crime, for moral safety. Being out at night was suspicious. Were you meeting a lover, a thief, a heretic, the devil? Let's say you're caught. Maybe you're just walking home late from visiting a sick relative, but you're a woman. Alone. Your hair uncovered. That's enough. Accusations fly fast in the dark. A torch is raised. You're dragged in for questioning because respectable people stay inside. And inside is no guarantee either. You close the shutters, bar the doors, and still the wind whistles through the cracks. The thatch shifts. The rafters creak. You hear footsteps on the roof, or was that just the wind? Your candle flickers. You murmur a prayer, because even in your own home, you're not alone. The night holds everything that daylight hides, the things no one wants to name, like hunger and grief and fear. You remember your cousin who never came home last winter, the shepherd who went to check on his flock and was found 2 days later, frozen stiff, eyes wide, mouth full of black feathers. They said he fell asleep. You don't believe it. And sometimes, just sometimes, you think you hear laughter in the woods. High, wrong. And very, very close. So you huddle near the hearth. You keep the embers alive, even if the firewood is almost gone. You whisper to your children, "It's okay. Just the wind. Just the wind." Even when you know it's not. Even when you hear breathing just outside the door. Because in medieval Europe, you survive the night not by bravery, but by stillness. By not making a sound. By not looking too long at the dark. And by waiting for the sun to rise, like it's the first time it ever has. The bell tolls once, then again, and again. No one speaks. The sound rolls across rooftops and slips between cracks in the shutters. It fills kitchens, taverns, meadows. Someone sets down a loaf of bread. A baby stops crying. Even the pigs seem to pause, snuffling at the silence that follows. Because in medieval Europe, everyone knows what a bell at this hour means. Someone has died. Again, funerals aren't rare events. They are routine, practiced, expected. Every village has its rituals, its habits, its quiet ways of saying goodbye. But just because death is common doesn't mean it's casual. Quite the opposite. It haunts everything. You might be carrying your grandfather's coffin on a cart you also use to haul hay. The wheel squeaks, the shroud flaps in the wind, and behind you walks the village, not in neat rows, but in a kind of solemn shuffle. People murmur prayers, some cry, others just look at the ground, lost in the arithmetic of their own losses. And yet, even here custom reigns. Let's talk rituals. If you can afford it, you bury the dead in consecrated ground, a churchyard, a monastery plot. The grave must face east, toward the rising sun, toward resurrection. If you bury the body facing the wrong way, that's bad. Very bad. If you're poor, and most are, you might dig the grave yourself with borrowed tools, shallow, rushed. Some families bury their dead at night without priests because they can't pay for a mass. No tolling bell, no blessing, just a mound of earth and a whispered name. One fringe tradition in parts of medieval Europe? Corpse cakes. A piece of bread placed on the dead person's chest to absorb their sins, then eaten by a mourner. Sin transferred through crumbs. Imagine biting into grief on purpose. And what about the body itself? There's no embalming, no preservatives. Time is short. The body starts to change quickly. Bloating, darkening, stiffening. You wash it with whatever herbs are at hand. Rosemary, sage, sometimes just warm water, and rags that will be burned afterward. You dress it in simple clothes. Sometimes a cross is placed on the chest. Sometimes a stone under the tongue, to silence the dead for good. Because not everyone trusts the quiet. Some fear the restless. If a person died suddenly, or violently, or without confession, they might return. Not as ghosts exactly, but as revenants. The walking dead, pale, bloated, hungry. Stories spread of corpses found out of place, of groaning heard from graves, of soil disturbed without footprints. How do you stop them? You bury the body face down. You bind the hands. You drive an iron stake through the heart. You fill the mouth with stones so they can't bite. These aren't metaphors. They're real burial practices, recorded in medieval texts and confirmed by modern archaeology. People feared the dead, especially the dead who died angry. And so the funeral isn't just farewell, it's containment. The church has its own rules. The body must be confessed before death, must be buried in hallowed ground, must not be a heretic, a suicide, or excommunicated. If they are, no funeral, no mass, just darkness and a hole. There are exceptions, always are, a sympathetic priest, a hidden blessing, but officially, certain souls are left outside the gates, literally. And if someone dies in the winter, good luck. The ground is frozen. You need fire to thaw the earth, or pickaxes, or patience. Sometimes bodies are kept in cellars or outbuildings until spring. Rats become a problem. So do smells. You pile herbs on top. Hope for the best. And still people die. In childbirth, from fevers, from accidents, from bites, burns, blisters, boredom. You watch your neighbor cough for 3 weeks, then vanish. Your cousin breaks his leg and is gone by week's end. Your sister starts shaking one night and never stops. There are no diagnoses, just guesses. Lung rot, blood thickening, wasting. Sometimes the cause is obvious. A blade, a fall, a bad mushroom. But often it's just life, fading out like candlelight. And grief, it's not loud here. It's quiet, heavy, worn like a second cloak. People don't wail. They nod. They sit. They eat bread and stare into the fire. They say things like, God's will, or it was her time. But you can see the way their hands tremble when they light the candle on the windowsill, the way they double-check the latch, the way they flinch when the bell rings again. Because it will ring again. Soon. Death doesn't make appointments. It just shows up. And the funerals continue. Processions through mud. Crosses carved by hand. Names whispered over open earth. Sometimes a bell. Sometimes not. Sometimes nothing at all. One open scholarly debate? Whether medieval people felt more grief or simply endured it differently. Were they numb or resilient? The answer, like most things here, is complicated. But one thing is certain. Death is a neighbor. You know his face, and he knows yours. So you light a candle. You leave a slice of bread on the sill. You say the prayer the way your grandmother taught you. And you hope, when it's your turn, that someone tolls the bell. That someone remembers your name. Even if it's just once. Even if it's whispered. A girl stands in a doorway. She's maybe 14, maybe younger. It's hard to tell beneath the layers of wool and weariness. She's watching the men pass. Villagers heading to the fields. Boys carrying bundles of firewood. Merchants shouting prices in the square. She doesn't speak, doesn't wave, just watches. Because in medieval Europe, being a woman means being invisible, until you're not. Let's get one thing clear. Women worked. Hard. They weren't idle damsels sipping mead in Sundapple Towers. They were in the fields, the kitchens, the markets. They brewed beer. They ran households. They raised children. They spun, stitched, cooked, cleaned, birthed, buried, and then did it all again the next day. But they had no voice. Legally, women were property, first of their fathers, then their husbands. If widowed, sometimes their sons. Your opinion wasn't asked. Your consent wasn't required. Your role was predetermined, and the boundaries were tighter than your corset. Which, by the way, didn't actually exist yet. That's a Renaissance myth. You're welcome. Most girls were married off by their teens. Choice wasn't part of the process. Maybe your husband was kind. Maybe not. If he beat you, that was discipline. The law allowed reasonable correction. And what counted as reasonable depended entirely on the man swinging the stick. Divorce? Practically unheard of. The church frowned on it like it was a sin wrapped in scandal, dipped in shame. You could seek annulment, but only under very specific conditions, like, say your spouse was secretly a monk, or already married, or literally a demon. Widowhood gave you a brief window of freedom if you managed to survive childbirth, illness, and poverty. A widow could sometimes own property, run a shop, or inherit a small patch of land, but remarriage was often expected. Because let's be honest, the village doesn't know what to do with an independent woman who doesn't answer to a man. One fringe superstition: if a woman had a mole on a certain part of her back, or a sixth finger, she might be marked as a witch. because of course she was. Anything unusual about a woman made people nervous. Let's talk about work. Peasant women rose before dawn, lit the fire, milked the goats, ground grain with a heavy quernstone that turned your shoulders into knots. They made bread, churned butter, fetched water, and this is before breakfast. They helped in the fields during planting and harvest, spun wool in the evenings, all while wrangling children and nursing the sick. And they were still considered unproductive laborers. In towns, women worked as weavers, alewives, washerwomen. Many were midwives or herbalists, keepers of ancient knowledge passed from mother to daughter. But if they got too good at it, if they healed someone the priest couldn't, if they mixed the wrong herb at the wrong time, they became witches. Accusations often came from neighbors. A spoiled batch of butter, a stillbirth, a strange dream. It didn't take much. A woman living alone, owning a black cat, knowing the name of a plant others didn't. Suddenly, you're in shackles, facing a priest with too many questions and too few answers. You deny the charges, of course you do, but they say the devil helps his servants lie. You confess, under duress, because they haven't fed you in days, because they've tied you to a chair for so long you forget how your legs work, because they promise mercy. They don't mean it. One mainstream historical fact: witch trials weren't at their height until the early modern period, but medieval Europe laid the groundwork. The fear, the suspicion, the idea that women could be dangerous simply by existing in the wrong way. Even women of status weren't safe. Queens were pawns, bargaining chips in royal marriages, their worth measured in dowries, heirs, and alliances. If they failed to produce a male child, they were blamed. If they were too political, they were dangerous. Eleanor of Aquitaine, remember, was imprisoned by her husband for encouraging her sons to rebel. Imagine that. You give birth to a king and still end up in a cold tower with only your regrets for company. Education. Rare. Some nuns learned to read and write. A few noble women became patrons of art and literature. But for the average girl, schooling was non-existent. Why teach someone who won't own land? Who won't hold office? Who won't write laws? What about safety? It depended on the day, on the man, on the mood of the street. There were no protections against assault, no recourse. If you were attacked, you were expected to bear it silently, sometimes literally blamed. She walked too far alone. She dressed too brightly. She was asking questions. Sound familiar? Even giving birth was risky. No hospitals, no clean sheets, no epidurals, just midwives boiling water and hope. And if you died, which many did, your husband remarried before the year was out, because life goes on and someone needs to bake the bread. One open scholarly debate: whether medieval women found solidarity and empowerment in the domestic sphere, or whether even their closest relationships were shaped by fear and hierarchy. The answer, as always, is both. Because women found ways to resist. They whispered stories, hid money, helped each other escape, raised children who asked better questions. They brewed healing teas that saved lives. They carved symbols into doorframes for protection. They endured, not quietly, but constantly. And some loved. Fiercely, unapologetically. They danced when no one was watching. They sang while stirring soup. They told jokes that made their daughters laugh. They survived in a world that asked too much and gave too little. So yes, women had no say, but they had presence. Like roots beneath stone, like fire hidden in coals, like strength passed down in stories no man ever bothered to write down. You step inside the stone building and it swallows you. Light dims, the air chills. Outside, the wind howls and the town bustles. In here, silence, stone walls, candle smoke, dust so thick it seems to settle on your soul. Welcome to the monastery. It looks peaceful, doesn't it? Don't be fooled. Because behind every chant and carved wooden bench lies a life of discipline, denial, and the slow unraveling of self. In medieval Europe, monastic life was often seen as a refuge, a place of spiritual focus, safety from the chaos of war and famine. But for those who actually lived within these walls, the story was far more complicated. Let's begin with the routine. You rise before dawn, every single day. The bell rings, and you leave your straw mattress to shuffle down the corridor in your robe and sandals, even in winter. No fire, no complaining. Your first stop is matins, the early morning prayers, and that's just the beginning. The liturgy of the hours breaks your day into holy segments, 7 prayers spread throughout the day and night. Matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. You pray, you chant, you kneel until your knees feel like cracked glass. And in between, work, glorious, monotonous, back-breaking work. Copying texts, tending gardens, feeding animals, scrubbing stone floors with cold water and reeds. You don't just read Holy Scripture, you reproduce it, letter by letter. Mistakes mean starting over. Eye strain is inevitable. Carpal tunnel, centuries before keyboards. All in flickering candlelight that turns every shadow into a question. Historians still argue whether the average monk found this routine spiritually fulfilling or soul-crushing. Probably both. Meals? Simple. Very simple. Bread? Cheese? Maybe beans. No meat. Unless you're sick or wealthy, and even then it's a treat. Conversation? None. Meals are eaten in silence, while one of the brothers reads aloud from Scripture or the life of a saint. You chew your bread and listen to stories of martyrdom and miracles while a crumb gets lodged in your tooth. And the rules? Let's just say, freedom of expression wasn't the vibe. You're bound by the rule of Saint Benedict, obedience, stability, and conversion of life. You take a vow of silence, a vow of poverty, a vow of celibacy. If the abbot says, clean the latrines, you clean the latrines. If he says, sleep on the floor, you sleep on the floor. If you complain, you're fasting tomorrow. And if you question the rules, you're disciplined. That can mean extra work, cold baths, solitary reflection, or worse, public humiliation during prayers. Because humility isn't just a value, it's a performance. You might be thinking, but surely monks had peace. And yes, sometimes they did. In the garden, in a quiet breath between bells, in the scent of parchment and ink, the hum of bees, the rhythm of script flowing beneath your hand. But loneliness is loud here. So is doubt. One fringe tidbit? Some monasteries kept silence boards, wooden tablets with painted symbols, used to communicate without words. Imagine living in such silence that even asking for more bread requires miming and pointing at a doodle of a loaf. And if you're a nun, life isn't much softer. In fact, in many ways, it's harder, because you're doubly invisible. First as a woman, then as a cloistered one. Some were sent to convents by their families. Too many daughters, not enough dowries. Others chose the life freely. Either way, they lived behind locked gates, with windows too small to see through and walls too thick to hear over. They embroidered, read, wrote poetry, prayed, baked bread, cared for the sick, watched the seasons pass like shadows across the chapel wall. One famous medieval nun, Hildegard of Bingen, defied the silence. She wrote music, theology, and medical texts. She saw visions. She was extraordinary. Which, of course, made her suspect. Because a woman with that much brilliance? The church didn't know what to do with her. Let's talk isolation. Some monks and nuns lived in anchor holds, one-room cells built into the sides of churches. Once inside, they were sealed in, literally bricked up. A small window for food, another to speak to a priest. That's it. You don't walk in the garden. You don't see the sky. You pray. Forever. Voluntarily. That's not retreat. That's surrender. And yet, people chose this life. Why? Sometimes for peace, sometimes safety, sometimes salvation, and sometimes, let's be honest, to escape marriage, war, or debt. But over time, even holy places rot. Monasteries became wealthy, landowners, power players. Some monks ate well, drank better, and had cellars deeper than most taverns. Not all lived in poverty. Not all practiced what they preached. Corruption crept in with the damp. Some became politicians in robes, trading favors, forging alliances, whispering behind tapestries. The church tried reforms. Sometimes they worked. Sometimes they didn't. So what remains? A candle, a chant, a cold room, a man hunched over parchment, a woman tracing prayers into bread dough with her fingertip, a silent courtyard where the wind tells stories no one dares to write down. Because the monastery isn't an escape, it's a mirror. It shows you who you are when no one's watching. And in medieval Europe, that's more terrifying than any battlefield. A sheep screams in the distance. You don't stop eating. You don't even look up. Because if you've lived long enough in medieval Europe, you know that sound doesn't mean a wolf. It means birth, or slaughter, or something in between. Animals are part of your life, as constant as hunger, as loud as bells. But don't picture cozy little farms with playful dogs chasing geese around a tidy garden. Think mud. Think flies. Think disease and sharp hooves. And think danger. Because in medieval Europe, animals aren't companions. They're tools, threats or suspicions in disguise. Let's start with livestock. If you're lucky enough to own any, they're probably in the same building as you. That's not a joke. Your home, the entire one-room structure, houses you, your family, and the cow, or pig, or goat. Heat is scarce. Animals are warm. Congratulations, you now share your sleeping space with something that eats straw and farts in its sleep. It's not just unpleasant, it's risky. Animals carry disease, lice, mites, worms. You walk barefoot through muck, then track it into your bedding. You clean up droppings with your bare hands. You butcher animals without gloves. One cut on your finger while handling spoiled meat, and, well, you might not see spring. And slaughter isn't neat. There are no tidy meat-packing processes. You tie the animal down, cut its throat, and collect the blood, not just to avoid waste, but because blood is valuable. It's used in black pudding, sausage, medicine, and sometimes, depending on the town, rituals. Let's talk pigs. Pigs are clever, smarter than most people realize, and sometimes they get hungry enough to turn on you. There are recorded instances, actual court records, of pigs killing infants, and not metaphorically. Like, really. Some were even tried for murder. Yes, pigs stood trial, found guilty, executed, because nothing says justice like hanging a hog in the square. You ever try to milk a goat that doesn't like you? It's war. Their horns are sharp, their mood is volatile, and their aim with a well-timed kick is surgical. Cows can crush your foot just by shifting their weight. Horses, they'll kill you accidentally or on purpose if spooked. And dogs, your supposed best friend, weren't pets. They were workers, watchdogs, ratters, hunters. If they stopped being useful, they were cast out. A wild dog roaming town wasn't a stray, it was a problem. One bite could lead to fever, madness, death. That's rabies, by the way. No cure. Once the symptoms appear, it's over. You scream, hallucinate, foam at the mouth, and die in terror. It's like being hunted from the inside. And medieval folks knew it. Even if they didn't understand the biology, they feared animals that acted strangely. They whispered. They crossed themselves. They killed first, questioned later. Cats? Oh, cats. They had a rough time. Early on, they were useful, great for controlling mice, respected even. But in later centuries, especially during waves of religious panic, cats became symbols of the devil. Black ones in particular. Witches were said to keep them as familiars. Some people believed cats could steal your breath at night, or speak in human voices, or sneak between worlds. In one especially cursed era, cats were hunted and burned en masse. One quirky outcome. With fewer cats, rat populations exploded, which, surprise, surprise, helped spread the Black Death. Actions, consequences, furballs. And don't get too sentimental about horses either. Nobles prized them, yes, for tournaments, war, and prestige. But peasants? You might never ride one. And if you do, it's likely pulling a cart and half-starved. You feed the horse before you feed yourself, because it's worth more. And when it dies, you cry. Not from grief, from panic. Because now you have to pull the cart. Let's not forget wildlife. You're constantly told to fear the forest, not just for bandits, but for beasts. Wolves, boars, bears, even lynxes in some regions. And when something howls at night, you don't go check. You bar the door. You pray. You stay very still. Wolves especially carry myth. Whole stories were built around them. That they hunted sinners. That they carried souls in their jaws. That they were cursed men. The infamous werewolves. Even some nobles believed in them. And every so often, someone was blamed for a murder and accused of shape-shifting. Trials, confessions, executions. Beast was just another word for outcast. One open scholarly debate? Whether the church truly believed animals could be possessed by demons, or whether that was just a metaphor for untamed nature. Again, maybe both. But even the smallest creatures held power. A flea. One flea, riding on a rat, strolling into a market with no fanfare, and within weeks, half the town is dead. The Black Death didn't need armies. It had fleas. That's the punchline of medieval life. You could survive war, famine, childbirth, torture, only to be undone by something the size of a breadcrumb. And insects? Oh, you have not suffered until you've lived through a medieval summer. Flies swarming your face, gnats in your ears, beetles in your bread, and lice. Lice always. You carry them with you. Your clothes are alive. You itch constantly. Sometimes you bleed from it. You never win. There's no pest control, just patience, and prayer, and occasional fire. And yet, you rely on these animals. The chickens for eggs, the sheep for wool, the ox for plowing. You hate them, fear them, love them. They're not your friends. They're not your enemies. They're part of you. Your day is shaped by them. Your survival depends on them. And sometimes you talk to them. Not because you're mad, but because they listen. They don't judge. They don't accuse. They just blink at you, chew their cud, and remind you that life, at its most basic, is cold, chaotic, and still worth crawling through. The cart comes at dawn. 4 wooden wheels, 1 driver, 2 oxen, and a smell that hits you before you even see it. Not firewood, not hay. Death. Again. It always starts the same. A cough, a fever, a strange swelling under the armpit, groin, or neck, hard as a stone, hot as coals, then weakness, then black spots, then silence, and then the bell. Or if it's already too late, no bell at all. This is the plague. The Black Death specifically, though medieval Europe didn't call it that. They just called it the pestilence or the great mortality or, most often, God's punishment. And really, could you blame them? Imagine your world falling apart in slow motion, and no one knows why. One day the baker's wife is chatting in the market. The next day the stall is closed. The next, you see the cart outside her home. And the day after that, someone else is gone. You might call it a disease, if you knew the word. But this feels bigger, like the sky has turned against you. Between 1347 and 1351, the Black Death killed an estimated 30 to 60% of Europe's population. Whole villages vanished, cities emptied, roads filled with carts carrying the dead, so many that graveyards overflowed. Bodies were dumped in mass pits, crosses were etched in haste, names were forgotten faster than they were buried. One fringe tradition? People stuffed posies, bundles of herbs and flowers, into their collars or masks to cover the smell, to ward off evil. Ring around the rosy. Remember that rhyme? It's not about playgrounds, it's about symptoms. A pocket full of posies. Ashes, ashes. We all fall down. That's not a lullaby. That's a survival manual. But it didn't work. Nothing did. You tried prayers, whole processions of flagellants, men marching through towns, whipping themselves bloody, begging for divine mercy. You tried fasting, fumigation, fleeing, which only spread the disease further. And you tried blame. That's the part that burns deepest. In cities and towns, panic turned neighbor against neighbor. Jewish communities were accused of poisoning wells, cursing crops, conjuring death with secret rituals. Entire Jewish neighborhoods were destroyed. People were burned, drowned, tortured, not by strangers, but by their neighbors. Historians still argue whether the church encouraged or failed to stop these massacres. Either way, the result was the same. Fear turned to fury, and fury needed a target. You tried to protect your home. You boarded up the windows. You burned sulfur. You hung garlic, coins, charms. Nothing worked. Even the rats didn't seem to die fast enough. And then came the quiet. The slow, strange hush that followed the worst waves. When half the town was gone, and the air no longer reeked of smoke and rot, just absence. A stillness so deep it felt like time had stopped. You walk through the square. The bakery's cold. The forge is silent. The church door hangs open. A dog sits in the middle of the street and doesn't move when you pass. And what happens after? You rebuild. What else can you do? Fields go untended. Cattle wander ownerless. Nobles scramble to fill power vacuums. Serfs, those who survive, suddenly find their labor in high demand. For the first time in centuries, peasants begin to bargain. Some even move, choose their masters, demand coin instead of grain. Because death took more than bodies. It took the old rules with it. Some see it as divine punishment. Others, divine opportunity. A strange silver lining to so much suffering. One documented result. Wages rose. Land was redistributed. Entire social structures were reshaped, not by kings or lords, but by sheer loss. But the scars remain, not just on the bodies buried in lime and haste, on the survivors. You never look at a sneeze the same way again, never feel safe near a crowd, never trust the warmth in your chest as just a fever. There's always a part of you that flinches when the air smells wrong. Even art changes. Once people painted saints, angels, battles. Now, skeletons, dances of death, grim reapers lurking behind wedding couples, memento mori carved into stone whispering, "Remember you must die." And you do remember, every day. Because death in medieval Europe doesn't come politely, doesn't knock. It floods the world, drowns the song, and rewrites the ending. And the worst part, you survive. You walk through it. You keep breathing. And somehow that's both a miracle and a burden. The sky doesn't like you. That's the first thing you learn when the weather changes. Fast, violent, and without apology. One moment, you're digging in the soil, hoping this year's wheat will be better than the last. The next, a gust slaps the spade from your hand, the clouds curdle, and you're drenched in a matter of heartbeats. Because in medieval Europe, when the sky shifts, the world gets mean. Let's start with the weather. You're at its mercy. No forecasts, no radar, just old sayings and gut feelings. If the rooster crows thrice before noon, rain will follow. Very scientific. And yet, the weather ruled everything. A late frost can kill your crops. A dry spring shrivels your food before it even flowers. A heavy hailstorm? That's a week's work pulverized in minutes. And you don't have backup. There's no grocery store, no deep cellar of canned goods. If nature flinches, you starve. Whole villages go hungry. People eat moss, acorns, boiled shoe leather. Some even grind bones into flour. Yes, that actually happened in the harshest years. And here's the kicker. You blame yourself. Or someone like you. Because bad weather doesn't just happen in your world. It's punishment. For sin. For heresy. For pride. The church is very clear on that. Drought, God's angry. Floods? God's furious. Lightning strike. God just got specific. People start whispering. The widow with too many herbs. The shepherd who won't go to mass. The child who talks to crows? Surely someone made heaven angry. And when things get really weird, blood-colored rain, halos around the sun, two-headed calves, it's not weather. It's a sign. Let's talk about one of the strangest recorded events in medieval chronicles, the Great Famine of 1315-1317. It wasn't just a bad harvest. It was years of rain, cold, rotting grain, starving livestock, mud so thick, wagons disappeared into the road. Horses died. People ate them. Then the dogs. Then, well, things got dark. Chroniclers describe families collapsing in the streets, children sold for bread, cannibalism whispered from behind shaking hands. And while modern historians debate how widespread the famine's worst effects were, the trauma stuck. For decades, people remembered the taste of fear. And that fear had a sound. Thunder. One fringe belief from the period? Thunderstones. People believed that when lightning struck the earth, it left behind magical black stones, elf arrows or sky spears, that could protect a home from future storms. Some even wore them as amulets. It didn't help. But when the sky is your enemy, you hold on to anything. And speaking of the sky turning against you, eclipses. Total eclipse? That's not an astronomical event. That's apocalypse preview night. The sun vanishes, the world dims, birds go silent, and everyone looks up in terror. Markets close, bells toll, people confess. You pray the darkness ends, because if it doesn't, you're next. One record from 1230 notes a sudden solar eclipse as the cause of a spontaneous citywide panic. People thought it was Judgment Day. A few even threw themselves into rivers. Better to meet God early than wait to be swallowed by whatever had eaten the sun. Another sky omen? Comets. To us, they're beautiful. To them? Harbingers. A comet appears, and kings tremble. Entire villages fast. Chroniclers blame them for everything from wars to royal deaths, to the collapse of barns. A ball of fire in the sky doesn't mean awe. It means something terrible is already on its way. And then there's the blood moon. You wake in the middle of the night. Something feels off. You look outside. The moon is red. A deep, eerie red, like rusted iron or old wounds. You wake the family. You kneel. Because that's not a celestial event. That's a curse with a timer. One open scholarly debate? Whether medieval villagers truly believed these events were supernatural, or whether the fear was more social, encouraged by sermons and superstition. Some argue the educated elite knew better. Others think even the scholars panicked. They just did it in Latin. And sometimes it wasn't even the sky. It was the earth itself. Yes, earthquakes happened. Big ones. One in 1348 struck Central Europe and was widely believed to be a punishment tied to the arrival of the Black Death. Entire cities shook. Church walls cracked. People wept. Some ran into the open fields and stayed there for days. Because if the earth was unstable, where could you go? And if fire started falling from the sky? That's hail. Big, bruising, crop-shattering hail that could rip the leaves from trees and leave livestock dead in the fields. In one region, people were so afraid of hailstorms, they hired special priests to chant during storms. hail wardens who rang bells to chase the clouds away. Spoiler, it didn't work. Even rainbows weren't safe. Some saw them as signs of God's promise. Others, warnings. A few chroniclers describe broken rainbows as omens, like heaven had fractured and light leaked the wrong way. So how do you live like this? You build your house low. You thatch your roof tight. You watch the sky with the eyes of a child peeking into a dark room. And you never, ever take a blue sky for granted. Because in medieval Europe, when the sky gets quiet, that's when you really start to worry. The wind rattles your shutters. Again, you don't even flinch. You're used to it by now. The howling, the creaking, the occasional far-off scream that may or may not be a fox. You wrap your cloak tighter, take one more look at the guttering candle, and blow it out. Darkness wraps around you like a second skin. You lie back on your straw-stuffed mattress and stare at the wooden beams overhead, your thoughts drifting, not up, but backward. Because if there's one thing medieval life teaches you, it's that you were never meant to be comfortable. You were born brutal, not in spirit, not in temperament, but in reality. Let's take stock, shall we? From the moment you could walk, you worked. From the moment you could speak, you obeyed. You've buried siblings, shared beds, eaten insects accidentally, and sometimes intentionally. You've faced winters that tried to eat your bones. You've thanked the sky for rain, even as it flooded your only pair of shoes. You never asked for comfort. You asked for survival. You got this. History books tend to remember kings, saints, and knights. But if you want to know what most people's lives were actually like, look at the silences, the footnotes, the crumbling gravestones with no names. That's where the truth lives. Let's talk about your legacy. You won't have one. There's no portrait, no statue, no illuminated manuscript singing your praises. You won't be quoted, copied, or canonized. You'll be lucky if your name is remembered for 3 generations. And even then, someone will probably spell it wrong. Your children might survive, or not. Your house might stand another 10 years, or not. Even your bones, carefully buried, wrapped in cloth, blessed by a priest, may one day be dug up and repurposed. Skulls stacked in ossuaries. Femurs used to prop up collapsing chapels. The line between sacred and structural is thin, and lime pits don't read eulogies. And yet, you endured. You woke each day to face a world that didn't care if you lived or died. And you lived anyway. You held onto scraps of hope the way others clutched relics, tightly, reverently, knowing it was the only thing separating you from despair. You weren't foolish. You weren't naive. You were resilient. You found joy where you could. A warm bowl of porridge, a song hummed beneath your breath, the sudden sight of green after too much gray. You carved patterns into spoons, stitched flowers into collars, painted saints on your walls, even when your hands were raw. You loved, fiercely and privately. You fought not with swords, but with endurance. And you laughed. Maybe not often, maybe not loudly, but you did. At rude jokes, at poorly sung ballads, at your neighbor's goat getting stuck in a bucket again. Because if the world is going to try to crush you, the least you can do is mock it back. And maybe not the violence, not the suffering, but the defiance. The quiet, daily rebellion of people who knew they were small and chose to keep going anyway. You were never meant to be comfortable. You were meant to survive, to carry the fire forward, to hand it, even dimly, to the next trembling soul behind you. And in the end, when the shutters stop rattling, when the world falls silent, what remains is not glory, not legacy, but life lived, fought for, and briefly, beautifully yours. The candle has burned to a stub now. Wax cools in lazy drips down the iron holder. The wind outside has softened, still present, still murmuring, but like a lullaby now, not a warning. The last echo of the day begins to settle deep into the wood and stone. You've made it. Somehow. Through the chill, the fear, the rough wool, the hunger, the grief, the aching knees, the too early bells and the too late prayers. Through blood moons and storm clouds, through screams you ignored and silences that screamed louder, through centuries that offered no comfort and barely any names. Still, you were here. And now in the stillness, you're allowed a breath, a real one. Long, slow, heavy with the scent of ash and hay, and maybe something sweet left behind on the table. A crust of bread, a sliver of cheese, a bruised dark plum. It doesn't matter, you're not hungry anymore. The storm passed, the dead were buried, the fire dimmed, the walls held, and for now, no one's calling your name. This is what peace looks like in a brutal world. Not ease, just absence of danger, just a moment without demand, just the fragile, flickering quiet of a life not yet taken. It's not enough for poetry, but it's enough for sleep. So let the shutters rattle a bit longer. Let the mice scratch in the thatch. Let the ghosts whisper outside your door, as they always have. You're not afraid anymore. You've already walked through worse than anything the dark can promise. Tomorrow, the bell will toll again. Someone will stumble in the mud. The fire will need tending. A cart will roll through the square with something to sell or something to take away. But not now. Now you lie still, and the world leans back. You close your eyes. You breathe in the air of 1,000 forgotten yesterdays. And you dream. Not of palaces or knights or saints. Just of warmth. And morning. And the sound of hooves not coming for you. Sleep well. The candle's out. And the dark, for once, is just dark. If you've made it all the way to the end, leave a comment and tell me what story you'd like to hear next. I genuinely enjoy seeing and reading every kind word you share. Thank you for watching. Sweet dreams and good night.